Well, Hugh, here we are on Leadership Uncertain again. And what I've been hearing a lot of from leaders lately is, I don't know. I'm hearing a lot of, I don't know.
Mm.
And it seemed like an awfully good place for us to be on a show called Leadership Uncertain. And I thought I'd also just selfishly use this time to prepare for a panel that I'm going to be on this evening
Okay.
about leading through chaos and the role of coaching and leading through chaos. That's the panel later today. So I thought, why don't we talk about leading through chaos and how do you make VUCA fun?
Well, you're
At
gonna have to
VUCA,
help me. Yes,
yeah,
go ahead.
VUCA, if you're not familiar with it, is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I'll break each of those down very briefly.
Mm.
Volatility, we've got a fast pace of change that is sudden. And so the rate, the pace, and the amplitude of change is unpredictable. Volatility. Uncertainty, we don't have all the information that we would need to predict outcomes. And so we don't know what the future is going to bring. Uncertainty. Complexity, even if we did have more information than we do, uh, we wouldn't be able to predict the outcomes because of the chaotic nature of things. We're not living in a world that's a Rube Goldberg machine where
Mm.
you can see how complicated it is and still one input leads to a predictable output.
Mm-hmm.
That's the complexity. And then the ambiguity, the information that we are looking at can be interpreted more than one way. And so all those things combine to create a very chaotic world. One of the things that I was saying to clients and to myself as well when COVID hit is it's not that things are any more uncertain. We've only had the fact of the world's uncertainty proven to us. And
Mm.
so here we are, always leading through uncertainty and chaos. And right now, I think it's just more obvious than usual. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so when you began with the premise, my very first thought, the very first thing that popped into my mind was, and how is this different from any other time?
Right. Yeah.
This is Tuesday. This is any given Tuesday, and we're Wednesday. So there you go. How's that working out? Uh, I say this because one of the most helpful principles that I've learned over the last, I'm going to date myself, but this month makes almost 25 years since I started my first business.
Mm.
And what I've come to learn is that I don't know is closer to my heart than ever.
Mm. Mm.
Um, there was a time where I thought I understood so many things, and I prided myself in being one of the smartest people in just about any room that I was in. And as I get older, I'm appreciating how, at best, untrue that is, and at
Mm.
worst, how deluded it may have been. And strangely, what's comforting is that the only things that we can claim to have real certainty about are death and taxes.
Death,
So, do we
taxes.
really want certainty about anything if these are the only things, and that's the quality of certainty that we have? These are the quantities, the phenomenon, the phenomena that have the quality of certainty.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that happens when we're introduced or reintroduced to the fact of uncertainty
Mm.
and the experience of instability And I'm guilty, as I'm about to charge you, not you necessarily specifically, Hugh, but the listener, is that we tend to then clutch at whatever seems stable and try to create some semblance of control, or at least that's the temptation. I remember one of the very first lessons that I learned as a lifeguard some 30 plus years ago is that somebody who's drowning has no compass mentis, and anything that is above the surface of the water is something that they can push down on in order to bring themselves up out of the water. And so when an uncertainty gets great enough and frightening enough, we can be very dangerous to those around us
And to ourselves.
and to ourselves. Yeah.
So that's therein lies whatever resource somebody's going to get out of today's conversation. It's right there. I know for me, we have just come through, the business has just come through a very tumultuous time.
Mm.
And we have had some very intriguing successes in the last 90 days that, if the interpretation is careless enough, it looks like security,
Mm.
but it could be wrapped in a just whirlwind of pain and failure if we're not careful about how we
Yeah.
use this window of opportunity and success.
That's I love that you're saying that. It reminds me of my own situation, a conversation I was having with a colleague over lunch today. Um, the short term for my business right now is it, we're in better shape than we've ever been, in that we've got more operating capital than we've ever had. So
Mm-hmm.
we've got more runway than we've ever had.
And more rope,
Yeah,
whether to build a
more.
bridge or to hang yourself.
That's right.
Choose your adventure.
And we've taken a new marketing approach that is extremely promising. So the short term looks lovely, the long term looks very promising, and our pipeline is as bad as it's ever been. And so the midterm is a little scary, and uh, ain't nothing certain. Even those constructs of the long term looks promising and things like that. That there is no certainty in any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, what I'd love for us to talk about today is how do we lead
Mm-hmm.
toward desired outcomes when we don't know what's gonna come along, or even whether those outcomes may be desirable in a little while. And given how frightening a VUCA world is for us and for our people, how do we
Mm-hmm.
have fun along the way?
Sure.
Well, while we're terrified.
I love the fact, normally you ask me very hard questions. Today, this is easy. This is the easy stuff because I've had 20 years to practice all of what you just described. Uh, Different generations of employees and contractors effectively navigating worlds from operating a financial services business in 2008.
Mm.
I was in real estate in 2001. For those of you who are old enough to remember the crashes that came in 2005, and again in 2008 with the financial collapse, and the recessions of 2013, and then when we had trouble again in 2017, and then when we had COVID come 3 years later. I mean, all of these were trials by fire, and the very fabric of existence was being questioned, and the decisions that we made, even to become entrepreneurs, was being questioned. And what I'll tell you is all of it is a story.
Mm.
So part of the responsibility of the leader, and we're just going to have a quiet conversation between us leaders with everybody listening, is You gotta, it's not that you're lying, but you are acting and projecting. Because if you know the truth, the closest thing to what feels like the truth is that Mecca is nowhere out here. It's not like there's any situation or any structure or any construct or any safety in any physical structure out here. And so, where do you have left to look? If you want safety and security, recognize that your next breath and the spine with which you choose to operate from is going to determine how calm you're going to stay in the next storm. And it is not about creating solutions. It is not about being clever or having the cutest idea or coming up with the next game plan. Because if it's successful, then you set yourself up to fail in a spectacular way if you're careless and have hubris or are arrogant. And if it is not successful, then you die by the sword. So, there is no way to escape. There is no way to outrun until you realize you don't have to. And that's the big trick. The trick is recognizing that if you're going to have calm, it's going to be because you are breathing deeply and it's coming from your bones. It's going
Mm.
to be because you recognize that there is value, and the value lives in a deeply held precept about the world. Mine just happens to be that I am in my best space when I am in service and I am humble.
Mm.
Arrogance tends to rob me of that perspective. And failure is a beautiful reminder
Mm.
that you are at your most, I am at my most graceful and my most intelligent when I'm in service.
Say more about in service, because
Hmm.
I think there's some real secret to the success of having fun, and also increasing the likelihood that you'll survive a VUCA world
Hmm.
in that.
Okay, so in service means a lot of things. So let's go there. Uh, Pick an audience. To my employees, in service means I'm listening to their concerns. I am a participant in their development. I am hearing and engaging in such a way that they have meaningful work. They are working with each other. They are this tone is being set that we are creating value aggressively
Mm.
in a space where we are honoring their skills and talents, and we're doing everything in our ability to evade bureaucracy. That's just my personal vendetta
And so
against
the
bureaucracy.
service there, in service, you're in service of what in that, in what you just spelled out for us?
So the particular flavor that we're going to engage lives in one of our core values, which is we are a space where chaos fades away.
Mm.
So in my world, that means creating a space for employees such that chaos fades away. Chaos is usually an external assessment of a world that we do not understand. Chaotic
Hmm.
theory isn't about things that don't make sense. They're about things that don't make sense to us. It's a
Yeah, we
localized
can't
effect.
parse.
Correct. And
Yeah.
so the way you do that is you simply recognize, well, what can you make sense of? Well, not much, but the beautiful thing is you are built in with the ability to do things that bring calm. What are those things? You can literally breathe and do nothing, but simply intelligently observe, which more times than not breathes intelligence.
Mm.
Give you a practical example if you'll take one. Go
Uh,
ahead.
I would just had a practical example of my own emerge, which I'm not as arrogant as I used to be. I'm happy to
Ah,
say.
sure.
Uh, I remember when I first started, or when I first became, I thought, relatively capable as a surfer,
Hmm,
going to a beach, having a look, saying, "There's the break I want," and paddling out, and not only getting creamed, I wasn't sure I was going to make it back to shore.
sure.
What you're told to do. by the folks who know. The true watermen of the break tell you to arrive, sit on the beach, and watch the break for 10 minutes.
Hmm.
Because what you're seeing now is not the whole of the picture. You don't know what this break is doing until you've observed it for 10 minutes.
And 10 minutes is not about 10 minutes, but it's 10 minutes. It's enough time for perspective to be developed.
Correct. And for the patterns of the changes that ebb and flow through this system to go through a couple of reps, so that whether intellectually or maybe even just by intuition, you
Yes.
start to have a sense of what is happening here. What am I going to get myself into by paddling out into these waters?
So you just hit on point number one that crystallizes service to everyone, but we're going to start with employees because that's the audience we chose. It is, I may not know everything, but I can know this. I can know this. Whatever can fit on the tip of your finger. If it's a situation, if it's a tempo, if it's a method, if it's a mean, if it's just the silence of whatever breath comes next.
I love that. And it reminds me of two things. One is a principle we teach our clients, and one is maybe the place in my experience as a leader that it comes from. I'll start there. As a theater director, and maybe I've told you, and maybe I've told our audience this story before. Anytime I walk into a first rehearsal, now I've got a new script. I've never directed this script before. If I have, I've never done it like this before with these people in this place. And I always find myself in the day or two leading up to that first rehearsal and in the hours leading up to that first rehearsal thinking, I have no idea how to direct this show. And I can feel the fear welling up in me that I'm going to be seen to be incompetent.
Mhm.
And then I remind myself, there's the yes and here. Yes, I have no idea how to direct this show. And in some ways, that's a real grace, because I don't, even if I knew what what this show was going to be, then I wouldn't need all these other people. It wouldn't be the experience that I love in theater. So that's good. I'll tell you what I do know. I know how to run a first rehearsal. And so that's what I do.
If you don't know how to run a first rehearsal, you know how to say people's names on a roster.
There you go.
Because that may be what's that. And one of the things, so we're breaking it down quite literally. It's the recognition that the more uncertainty you have, the more value there is in recognizing momentary intelligence. So it's less timescape and vision and more present moment awareness and operation, tactical stuff. There were days where Friday was payroll and it was Tuesday, and all the math suggested that Friday was not going to happen. But guess what? It was Tuesday, which meant there were 72 hours of possible runway in which we could solve Friday's problem starting right now. Now, what kind of mindset do you have to be in to generate payroll for Friday? Guess what? It's not going to be fear and loathing and worrisome. And you can't be on Friday because it's not Friday yet.
Yep.
But we're here, and there is nothing like glorious motivation, glorious purpose that can be found in the 72 hours of what is freaking possible, because you have nothing like a big debt or a big disastrous consequence on
Right.
the other side of some really pointed creativity.
And even that 72 hours is like eating an elephant. You can only do it the one bite at a time.
1 hour at a time, and the 1 hour can only be spent 60 minutes at a time, 1 minute of 60 at a time.
When I was teaching acting in a college at University of Massachusetts, on the first day of class, I would always ask, I was teaching an intro acting class. I ask everybody, how many of you have taken an acting class before? And the hands that went up some hands went up, some hands didn't, and I would turn to the folks whose hands didn't go up, and I'd say, "You all have a leg up."
Mm.
And there were some people who had learned in high school, as most of us do, that acting is pretending. It's something, it's something interior that you then kind of bring out for everybody. And then the other people, very often, they're afraid of it. They may even, I remember one person's a scene calling for this student actor to stick out their tongue, and they were just like, "That's not my personality."
Hmm.
It's kind of like, you understand how this acting thing works, right? Like, your personality is not the point. Um, and I had created a game that I called Tail, and essentially it's hide and go seek, where you are hiding and seeking at the same time. And when I find you, I don't say, "Ha ha, you, I found you." I try to stay hidden from you and from everybody else at the same time as I'm taking notes on your activity. So I'm spying on you, essentially. And I had everybody always, after the first one, starting the second time I taught this course, I had everybody, in the first week, we were playing this game out on the quad. And I remember watching this very reserved, I don't want to do anything embarrassing student watching somebody taking notes. There's a security guard kind of over his shoulder. He knows the security guard is there. He's kind of trying not to get in trouble with the security guard. There are people everywhere. And when the target of his observation turned around and he thought he might be seen, even with all of this potential getting in trouble with a security guard, potential embarrassment in front of others, he did a dive roll over a hedge without thinking. And that level of present moment focus on purpose and commitment to purpose, it is one of the most glorious things in the world. And everybody had a grand time, because there's just something so glorious about being in the present moment that comes out of being so committed to a purpose. And that's one of the beautiful things about sports and games and things like that, in my experience.
Let's go further. So let's build on that, because you hit on something else that was really important. And it was all about global assessment. So one of the things that's really important to preserve, because now we're going to talk about the game. We've set the stage to talk about present moment awareness. That's the activity. But what we haven't talked about is perspective. So if you wish to play a game of, you said VUCA is the new term that I'm going to learn and start using.
Yeah, from like it came out in the 80s. I think it was a military term.
I like it. Well, the next part is, what's the perspective that you're going to hold?
Mm-hmm.
What's the disposition that you're going to walk around the world in, if this is the state of mind, and you get to be a leader who still is effective at the end of the day? I will tell you, it's a little perverse now, but there's nothing like a good calamity to give you something to get excited about. I remember a friend came to me once and they said, "Oh my God, I've got 2 weeks of operating capital left. I don't know what's going to happen. My partner is suing me, and I don't know what's going to happen in my world because everything's falling apart." And I remember my response to them was, "Oh, great. Now you have all the ingredients. Now we can get to work. Now it's fun." Because now the stakes are high. You have every motivation and every incentive to perform.
Mm.
And now you don't even have the gift of time. Now you can't even procrastinate. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And the fact that my mind works that way now after 20 years of abuse, it is literally a gift. It's a gift because now you realize the external world of circumstance has nothing to do with the internal world of response.
Mm. It reminds me, in a kind of perverse way, of a conversation you and I have had a couple of times. You've told me about your learning to speed read.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, one of the secrets to, if not the secret to speed reading, was to hold the perspective that the very next word or two might have the secret that would unfold everything for you. And so
Sure.
that creates a voraciousness to the where every next word draws you forward.
Yes, that was definitely
And
part of the space.
there's something about a calamity that can put us into that experience,
Oh, so
and
let's
that
go there.
experience is
Let's
always
ride that wave.
available.
Let's ride that wave. So one of the very extreme exercises that we used to go through was to learn, because the way that I learned to speed read, it actually involved managing and playing with your own emotions to put yourself in different emotional states to accept the information from the book. That was
Mm.
part of how this particular coach taught the subject. And one of the things he had us try was, could you learn as if your life depended on it? As if, could you put yourself into such an emotional state that accepting and absorbing this information meant whether you lived or died? Now, I will make a little less of a, it's an interesting experience to listen to people who become experts on cancer because their mom or their dad's
Mm.
life
Hmm.
depends on them learning this information. And some of them are more educated than doctors, even because they will absorb a ridiculous amount of information because somebody they care about is at risk. You've heard many times about the body's ability to imbue mothers with almost superhuman strength because the baby that they care about more than their own life is stuck under the car, right? And they'll break bones, but they will lift that car and they will get that car out of the way and they will be able to grasp muscular control far beyond, and they'll have adenosine triphosphate just coursing through their veins um, for the moment of time. What's available to us is everything that our chemical cocktail can provide us, that is our body and our hormones, to have whatever outcome we want. And what's curious is there is a plan and a course of action. There's a plan and an intelligent course of action for almost any outcome. So we are sitting here, and that is an underlying belief that I have. There is an actionable plan for any outcome that you can imagine. Your job is
If
to
you want X, there is some formula that can get
yes,
you there.
yes, in whatever the time frame. You need to make $1 million in a day. There are people who make $1 million in a day. The question is, do you have the orientation? Do you have the systems? Do you have the team? Do you have the belief? Do you have the plan? Do you have the strategy? Do you have tactics? The question is, if the answer is all of that is yes, then who do you have to be, or who do you have to pretend to be for 15 minutes so you can access whatever that is to make that plan happen? And
I-
the ability to be available to that course of thought, that train of possibility driven thinking, and the confidence to know that the intelligence to act on that will be available when needed, gives you the calm to speak to somebody else and say, no matter what is happening, it will be okay.
And there's something to that formula that can be very delicate.
Sure.
Um, there's the necessity for commitment,
Hmm.
which is potentiated by the confidence, I think, that you're talking about. It's hard to be committed to something for which you have no confidence. Our brains are
Mm,
not wired. Our
okay,
brains are
we're
not
gonna talk.
wired for
We're
that.
gonna fight about that one, but keep going.
Okay. And then there's also the what I'm going to call hard requirement to not be attached, to not be attached
For sure.
particularly to the means and maybe even to the outcome. There's a show there's a show that I just kind of binged my way through while doing stupid busy work. I don't remember the name of the show. Gold and Greed, I think it was called. And
Okay.
this man Forrest Fenn put $1 million+ in a treasure of gold and knickknacks in a treasure chest, hid it wrote a book with a poem in it that evidently had the clues to how do you find this. And there's one family of folks who were doing this treasure hunt who read the poem, saw the clues, saw that by some kind of convoluted logic, it mapped out perfectly to their neighborhood. And they determined that it was under this boulder. And they spent 2 years
Hmm.
with their limited resources trying to move, break, otherwise explore this boulder, and found that indeed it was not there. And anybody without the full attachment that they had to being right would have seen there are scores of places in the Rocky Mountains, which is where this thing was hidden. Scores of places between Wyoming and Colorado and areas south. Scores of places that could have mapped out equally well to this one spot in this under this one boulder, and they lost so very much because their commitment was not joined with a lack with that detachment.
So let's explore where that goes, because you just hit on another very important part of this. I don't know. I really want to avoid calling it a formula because it's not. But let's just call it a schema for for it's not positive thinking because it doesn't
Hmm.
require you to think positively. You do have to have a proclivity for possibility, a determination to get somewhere. And to your point, it's not about the solution. So one of the things, and you and I have talked about this at some level in the past, it's really important for us to realize there are so many ways to get through. So we may start off with the idea that we may need $1 million to solve a problem, right? But that's one solution. Once you start working and you are aware and available and playing the game of curated, I'm going to call it curated intelligence. Why do I call it that? Because it means that you are literally putting yourself in a place where you're saying, okay, I'm not going to panic. I'm going to be here. I'm going to focus. I'm going to solve the challenge that's in front of me. But in order for me to solve the challenge, I can't be at the level of the challenge. I've got to be in service. I've got to be solving somebody else's problem that is bigger than my own. I've got to be creating something in the world to be able to make enough friends, capital, relationships, so that this other thing can phase out of my life.
I want to check something out with you. Is it sounded like you just said that in order to effectively get through the unknown, maybe it's to maximize your chances of getting to where you're headed, you have to be in service not of your own objectives, you have to be in service of someone else.
You have to be in service of something bigger than the problem that you're facing.
Awesome.
Has to be. You can't play at the same
Right.
level.
It's not just I'm going to solve this problem. It's
Well, the way you solve that problem is you get help to solve that
yeah.
problem. And that help may need money, that help might need other talents, that help might need other people, that help might need you being able to spend your time on it, but you have to then redirect other resources to go do other things that you may have to do. I don't want to necessarily collapse this to a linear process because it's not. The point I want to make here is there isn't one solution to the problem. You may be convinced that there is a way you want to solve it, but once you get working, organic intelligence is going to suggest you're going to find other ways to get that itch scratched.
And so here's one of the things that my experience maps, and you tell me if this bit of wisdom that I think I've experienced myself correlates with what you're saying. If I've got this proximal problem that matters to me,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got scores of them, as we all do, then it's in service of some bigger, greater problem, in service of something else, is actually going to help all of these more proximal problems evaporate.
Let me ask you a different question. How many times have you been taken out by some problem that you thought was going to be the end of it?
How many times have I been taken out by, or how
How
many
many
times have I
times have you
thought?
been eliminated? How many times have you lost the thing you thought you were going to lose because you had a problem that seemed completely insurmountable when it presented itself?
Yeah, I'm somehow still not quite understanding what
That's
you're
the
asking.
point. You haven't been taken out yet. You have not been eradicated.
Got it.
You have not been removed from play. Sometimes you haven't even solved the problem yet. It's still there in some format, but it is neutered or suspended, or somehow it may have resolved itself. But the issue is that it is not being assessed actively as the threat that it once was, because you are doing something bigger that is either suspending it, has had it go away, or whatever. The point is that there is enough intelligence playing in your world such that you are working with people, you are eating, you are contributing. And while you're doing it, if you can manage your perspective and be perverse enough to enjoy the process, that process will have other people not understanding why they're having fun too, even if it could be hell outside.
So be perverse enough
Okay.
is right. That's not a, like, I don't know how to go be perverse. I will tell you that I think that every time I raise my sights to some greater objective or some greater problem, then the problems that I am dealing with that seem torturous,
Hmm.
I find greater levity in my ability to address them.
Certainly. Yes.
And so there's which, maybe a perverse practice, and it's a defined practice for me to raise my sights and attack something bigger.
Well, I told you the story of how we couldn't raise money for our first store. So we owned retail
You
financial
did tell
stores
me
in North
this,
Carolina.
and I think you
Couldn't
should
raise money
absolutely
for
tell us this
six
story again.
months. For 6 months, I think it was like $150,000. Some not really ridiculous amount, but it was enough to be annoying that nobody would say yes, that because it was too small for big people and it was too big for small people. And so we were in this weird place where we couldn't get this thing financed and we were on the clock. And
You
we
just
were
wanted
like,
to open a store.
we just
It's
wanted to
like, let
open
me
a store.
help me open a
Just give me some
store.
money, $150,000 and then $25,000 for operating. Just let it happen. And it wouldn't happen. And 3 months went by and we ended up going to this conference. We just said, you know what? Let's go learn. Let's go learn from people. Let's go be connected to other people in this community. And we were young and we would listen and we would talk and we would just honor people. And this gentleman met us at the conference. This is the leadership team I had at the time. And he just would talk and he just wouldn't stop talking. And we were polite and we just not stop listening. So we listened to him and we listened to him for like 2 days, just talking, telling stories, all sorts of stuff. And at the end of the 2 days, we were like, okay, well, we're going home now. And he says, okay, have a good trip back. He calls us 2 days later. He said, I'm in negotiations to sell my stores. I don't want to sell them to anybody but you. You're the right people for the stores to buy. And we're like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, well, you're humble. You were willing to pay attention. You young people were just willing to let me tell you stories on how to be better at this. You're clearly going to have the right kind of culture for the employees that I'm going to be leaving behind. And I wouldn't trust my assets to anybody else because I really don't want to sell them to corporate. That's what he said to us. Totally flabbergasted. All we were was just humble and open and naive and just listening to people who would talk to us. And
Didn't want to be rude and shut him up.
and we're like, well, wait a second. I can't even raise money for one store. How am I? He has two that he's trying to tell us and sell us. And he's like, no worries. I'm going to finance them 80%. Just come up with a 20% down payment. I'll finance it for you. You can refinance everything in a couple of years. So now we went from having one store to try to finance to having to finance three stores, because even the purchase was one thing, but then there's operating capital and all this other stuff that you got to find. And then we had the idea and said, well, there, those two stores are in this city over here, and we're in this city over there. And you know what? I bet you we could develop in that city and that city and that city. Why don't we make a plan for 10 stores? And then we settle on a plan for 15 stores, for which we would have five in the first phase and then another 10 to come 5 years later. And we took that to a bank, and within 3 weeks, we got all the money we needed for
Boom.
not just one, but for all three. And that's how that started. Now, we never ended up getting to 15. I think we did three, and then we bought two more, and then the two more were where we were going to go. And at some point, we caught the attention of a much larger operator who liked how we did business, and they basically set out a deal for us to take our five stores that were as profitable as their bottom 25 stores, and we were going to merge companies. So our operating techniques would basically lead a conglomerate of 57 stores. And the way the story ended up, we ended up having to sell our stores to someone else because we got into a legal trouble with them, whatever. Ended up getting sold out, and they put a 3-year non-compete on me. So I had to find something else to go do. But I had a lot of money in my pocket to make that happen. I say all of this because one of the challenges with the five stores that would come later is that I had a whole bunch of employees rob me of about $250,000 during this story. Remember, every good thing sets us up for the next failure. Every failure sets us up for the next success. So they stole all this money, and one of my leaders in the company said, "We'll never get out of this. We'll never be able to pay our investors back. We're going to have to declare bankruptcy and move on." And so the sale to this other party made it so that we could pay everybody back and pay them retroactively a 10% return on their money for every year they were invested with us, which was, huge karmically. Just being able to do what you say and stand up for your debts and settle all those things and keep your promises was a big, big deal. So I tell you all of this train because there was never any safety. The sky was always falling. And when it didn't fall, the blessings that came were a great setup for the next failure. And the next failure was a great setup for the next success. So if you know that ahead of time, you can manage a few things. You can stay steady, recognizing that if there's going to be strength, it's going to be in your backbones and between your cells. It's not coming from anywhere else. Because it's there, and because the world is naturally a chaotic place, you get to have very present moment awareness, and you get to have fun being in service of something that allows you to create value. Recognize that the problems will eat you eventually. Your choice is whether it takes 5 minutes or 5 decades or 5 lifetimes. Your call. And there's no wrong way to play the game. If you want to be miserable and cantankerous, the world will absorb miserable and cantankerous people all day long. No problem. If you want to be kind, loving, gracious, and live into values while you have this experience and this adventure of failure and catastrophe and loneliness and fighting and conflict and joy and happiness and transcendence and hope and calamity and regret and kindness and transcendence and folly and foolishness and stupidity and ignorance and grace and wisdom, all of those things are part of the adventure. And guess what? You get to be the leader that breathes deeply, that finds your focus, that recognizes that your service gets to be greater and all your problems are gifts that you get to work through to make something bigger unfold. And when all of this is said and done, if you need extra motivation, how about the really kind idea that your entire purpose of existence could just be so that the stomach bacteria gets to exist in the world because that's what God put you on the planet for. There's a bad joke for the day.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you. as a fellow adventurer in the unknown. And I'm reminded, one of the things that I've been doing recently is reaching out to almost every leader that I've ever had any connection with, even if it's just like we connected on LinkedIn this one time and nothing ever came of it. And I'm asking in writing, how are you and your team adapting with all the uncertainty? And it's gotten me into some very real, very valuable conversations. And I've been absolutely gobsmacked by the number of people who have responded with, what uncertainty? There's no uncertainty.
Great.
And I just, when I get that response, and it's been a fairly common response, I have this sense within me that I can't see which truck it is. There is a big old Mack truck headed right their way, or they're lying to me, and
Well,
that's okay.
you're not well. I mean, what uncertainty, right? So, here's a thought that I have often. It is I often like to level set my perspective. Anytime I am out of balance, there's usually a beautiful feedback loop that will serve a good sauce of humility if I'm not wary, right? A good serving of humility. This one is the following. We, at the end of the day, this is true. We all, anybody watching this video that's still on planet Earth, we all are committed to a blue rock that has a little bit of grass and some trees and a few piles of concrete
And this little whisper of atmosphere.
Of an atmosphere. That's right. And it's hurtling through an ocean of death because everything outside that little wisp of atmosphere is out to systematically kill you.
It's deadly.
On purpose.
All of it.
No accidents, right? And there is so much more of it than there ever will be of you. And so there are only a few hundred human beings that have been trained to take aircraft that become spacecraft to go out there. And the governments that train them spend hundreds of millions of dollars on teaching them one skill. Don't panic. Panicking will kill you and everybody else you care about. We are in space. Our spaceship happens to be a blue rock with a very thin slice of atmosphere. We have genetic investment of hundreds of millions of years. And guess what? The lesson is the same. Our charge is the same as the astronaut's charge. Don't panic.
Job number one.
Job number one. Don't panic.
I remember Bob Wiley trained me to be an outdoor in wilderness first aid, right? So you're out there in the wilderness. That was my job. I was taking kids out through the wilderness, so I needed to be able to do some level of medical care for them while we tried to figure out how to get real medical care to them. So I got to learn wilderness first aid from Bob Wiley. And in every crisis, Bob said, step number one, take a smoke break. Cool your pits. And it wasn't just take a break, because I remember later somebody, in a more PC environment, didn't want to talk about smoking. His step number one was to have a tuna moment. In other words, like eat a tuna sandwich. There's something better about a smoke break because nicotine is a marvelous chemical for settling your nerves.
Hmm.
And so whatever it is that settles your nerves, if it's box breathing like they train Marines to do, or nicotine, or calling your buddy Hugh, or whatever it is that's going to settle your nerves so that you're not responding in panic, so that you, even if it's just to remind yourself you are not drowning, and everything that seems to be above water is not necessarily something to shove down.
Yes.
Because if you are a drowning man and you drown the lifeguard who has come to save you, guess what? You have delayed your drowning by about 3 to 5 seconds.
Right. Right. And you now become a danger to the world around you because
Yeah.
you lack perspective.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Again, it's part of the journey. I don't want to make lacking perspective wrong. I will simply suggest that it's a very costly way to navigate the world.
Mm.
And here's how I feel about volatility and crisis. I did hear a really good quote that said, if your heart weren't volatile, you would be dead. Your
Mm.
heart is characterized by volatility and uncertainty. It
Mm.
just happens to be rhythmic because we have enough of a perspective on it.
Mm.
So I guess my message to the listener, if they've managed to stay through all this craziness, is in answering the call of the unknown, appreciate that you really never had the known to begin with. The certainty was never a thing that was real. You have just as much chance of being hit by a bus the next time you go driving. It is
Mhm.
just as real as it's ever been. It's just there are certain levels of risk that we've come to appreciate, and there's a certain model of the world that we have come to appreciate. And when that gets shaken up a bit, how can you have that serve you? How can you take calamity and the prospect of absolute failure and turn that into something exciting? Because what's awesome is that there is very little physiological response difference between being afraid and being excited.
Right on. It's all the story you tell yourself about this
It's the
chemistry.
assessment. That's right. The
Same
assessment is
chemicals,
crucial.
and it's up to us to tell the story. I think this is a marvelous place to stop. Uh, this notion of don't panic. Tell yourself a different story about your experience. Um, Everything always comes back to Douglas Adams,
Mm. Is
who
that the
wrote
Hitchhiker's Red?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The
Yes.
the the tagline of which is "Don't panic."
I love it. Thank you
All
for
right,
today, Aaron.
Hugh. Thank you for being here, listener. Thank you for joining us for Leadership Uncertain, where we are having adventures in confusion, power, love, and dignity. And what better message for dignity can there be than "Don't panic"? Bye bye.